It's been a tough month for the global stock market. The S&P 500 is down 8.6% and heading for a market correction, and is now trading back in line with levels that we've not seen since late October 2024. And over here in the UK, it's not so great either. The FTSE 100 is down 3% from its previous high, and the FTSE 250 is down 5% as of recording. But why exactly are all of these global markets in decline? Well, that's what we're going to discuss during today's video. Since Trump came into power, there's been one thing that's absolutely shook the market, and that's tariffs. Now, tariffs are taxes which are charged on goods imported from other countries. Now, initially, you might think that that's quite patriotic and quite nationalist in order to support growth domestically. But because we now very much operate in a global economy, this could very much be detrimental to the United States, at least in the short term, and of course some of the big companies that operate within it. If we take Apple, for example, they produce a large volume of their iPhones over in China. But with Trump implementing a 20% tariff on imported goods from China, say your iPhone 16 Pro costs $999 as of today, even if, say, Apple passes on 10% of a price hike to consumers, that $999 iPhone now becomes just shy of $1,100. You then have to ask yourself the question, well, then what does that do to consumer demand? With that additional price point, will that materially reduce consumer demand? And that's not just for the iPhone, that's all Apple products that are manufactured over in China, and inevitably result in a potential impact on Apple's revenue and potentially earnings too, which all affect the value of the company's stock. It's one where we'll have to kind of sit back and wait to see if there's any kind of impact, especially over the next few quarterly earnings reports that Apple put out. Now, in order to try and combat this, Apple kind of have three options. They divert manufacturing to a different country like India, they apply for an exemption, or they swallow the tariffs and hike prices. Now, Apple are only one company that could potentially be affected. There are multiple other companies within the S&P 500 that could also be affected too, because there are many companies that do have part of their supply chain over in China, from automotive to consumer goods to tech to medicine. These goods in total add up to $438.95 billion worth of imported goods in 2024. So admittedly, a huge amount of money spent on these Chinese imports, which are now going to have a 20% premium priced on them because of this additional tariff. Now, unfortunately, these tariffs don't really go without consequences. Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, has been reported saying that if the United States persists in waging a tariff war, a trade war, or any other kind of war, the Chinese side will fight them to the bitter end. We advise the US to put away its bullying face and return to the right track of dialogue and cooperation before it's too late. And that fighting talk was also backed up with some levies of their own.
China released its slew of countermeasures, pretty extensive this time round compared to the previous round in February. They're targeting up to 15% tariffs on a list of US goods.
These agricultural levies could certainly negatively impact US farmers, as China is one of the biggest consumers of products like chicken, beef, pork, and soybeans, all of which those products will now face a 10 to 15% tax, which will come into effect on the 10th of March, which is as of today, as of recording this video. Now, 30% of all US soybeans are actually exported to China currently, but there is enough worldwide supply for China to get their soybeans from elsewhere. And ironically, it's come out in the press that China have suspended US soybean imports from 3 different companies in the United States. It's a little bit tit for tat at the moment, and whilst I'm absolutely sure that Trump has absolute and utmost positive intentions for the United States, achieving that by almost alienating some of the other countries that you do business with hopefully doesn't end up being a mistake. Because it's not just China, Canada and Mexico that have been on Trump's hit list. Even Euronews has reported that Trump isn't much of a fan of European countries either. So look, what's the overall impact here? Well, I guess you could kind of say that we're potentially looking at higher prices. With higher prices ultimately means consumers will pay more, potentially leading to inflation, companies then potentially looking to absorb some of those costs, which could end up leading to a decrease in profits. But ultimately, Trump's view is by making these foreign imports more expensive, then hopefully that will encourage companies domestically to build and manufacture and invest in the United States instead. And admittedly, that is starting to take effect already, with Reuters reporting that Honda are to produce the next Civic in Indiana and not Mexico. Apple have reported to committing $500 billion in US investment, starting with an advanced manufacturing factory in Texas. Eli Lilly, who are a pharmaceutical company, have announced plans to invest $27 billion in new US plants, due to the tariffs too. So companies are already looking to mitigate the risks that those tariffs have on their business, whether that's moving manufacturing domestically or whether it's moving it just to an alternative country, which perhaps tariffs haven't been imposed on, to amend that supply chain to make sure that the companies that are going to be affected by it are affected, but in the least way possible. So the economic story here, at least in the short term, could be negative. And it very much appears that Trump's kind of come into power, he wants to get stuff done, and he's very much front-loaded all of that kind of change, which could be seen as quite radical rather than kind of slowly embedding those changes over time. And as a result, that is arguably one of the reasons why investors and just global markets more generally are a little bit shaken up right now. But that's only one story in the Trump administration that's caused a little bit of a wobble in the stock market. The FT reported this morning that the US economy is heading for a recession. And whilst tariffs could certainly be one of the reasons for that, another reason to also consider is that the US administration right now are very much looking at government funding cuts. One of the first actions that Trump took was to sign an executive order to create the Department of Government Efficiency, with Elon Musk acting as a senior advisor to the president, with the core purpose being to maximize governmental efficiency and productivity, which essentially is another way of saying minimizing costs for maximum return. In the space of about 6 weeks, the Department of Government Efficiency website claims to have estimated savings of $105 billion, the equivalent to $652.17 per taxpayer. This level of transparency for a government is actually quite astounding, with literal receipts of cost savings, with contracts being terminated for convenience in order to save millions and millions of dollars. And of course, saving money is obviously a good thing. However, what we also need to consider is whether those cost savings will then have a knock-on effect or an overall detriment to the recipients of that funding, or whether all of these savings were just needless expenses going out with very little to no benefit whatsoever. I guess we'll have to wait and see what those overall consequences are, but regardless, being able to save $105 billion is quite the sizable amount of money. However, relative to US national debt, which currently sits at $35.5 trillion and rising by the second, it's still a drop in the ocean. However, what the Trump administration are trying to tackle right now is the government deficit, which isn't exactly insurmountable. The deficit is as a result of spending more money than they receive via tax revenues, with that deficit at the end of 2024 being reported as $1.83 trillion, in which case $105 billion is about 6% or so of that overall deficit figure. So there's still very much a long way to go just to get to a place where the books are somewhat balanced. However, all of these cuts to spending, tariffs, and all that kind of stuff may not exactly be congruent with short-term economic progress. And here's what Trump had to say about that.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time.
So Trump's definitely not ruling out a recession. In actual fact, I think he kind of acknowledges that things could get worse before they get a little bit better, with his overall goal being to create additional wealth for the US and the US taxpayer. Linking this back to the stock market though, markets kind of hate uncertainty, and I think with Trump coming in and signing what seemed to be an executive order every single day for the first couple of weeks, I think has kind of shook the market and shook investors within it. So that's the US. Now let's come over to the UK and discuss some of the issues that we're going to be facing into literally within the space of the next 4 weeks, which could have a knock-on effect on both the stock market and the economy. On the 6th of April 2025, the UK government's employer national insurance contributions will increase from 13.8% to 15%, along with a cut in the employee's earnings threshold, where employers become liable to pay NI, which has dropped from £9,100 to £5,000 a year. As a result of these changes, the UK government reported in the autumn budget back in 2024 that they expected to raise between £23.8 billion and £25.7 billion a year for the next 5 years from this initiative. But this initiative has not gone down well with business owners. According to a survey done by the Chambers of Commerce, 82% of businesses say that NI rise will impact their business. 79% of businesses do not feel the government has properly assessed the impact of its new policies. 58% of businesses say that they will be impacted with recruitment, with 54% of businesses saying that prices will be impacted too. That's an overwhelming majority of businesses. Many of them will be small and medium-sized companies who are the backbone of the UK economy that feel overall like it's been negatively impacting on their business as a result of these changes. Here's what some of the real impact is on these businesses that have been reported. A micro consulting firm in London says that current government policies make it unviable to continue trading for no return. A small marketing firm in Southeast England said that national insurance contribution changes will probably discourage me from recruiting and may result in job losses. And a medium-sized manufacturing firm in West and North Yorkshire said that national insurance contributions will cost us an additional £100,000. I'm not sure about you guys, but for me personally, I just can't see how this plays out positively. In the short term, this increase in national insurance could result in, as reported by these businesses, an increase in unemployment, reduced profits, reduced investment, and result in potentially inflationary pressures, as these costs inevitably are going to get passed on to customers. And even if you take the stance of, well, there's many multi-billion pound organisations here in the UK that can afford that extra amount in terms of national insurance contributions, actually I think what we need to be focused on is the impact that it's going to have on those small to medium-sized companies, and actually that we need to protect those companies rather than expose them to additional taxes. The reality is the top 1% of earners here in the UK currently contribute to 28.2% of income tax revenue. That's 1% of people in this country contributing nearly a third of the income tax revenue. So there is a huge reliance on the top 1% in this country to stay in this country. And I couldn't find the exact figures on this, but there will also potentially be a decent percentage of top 1% earners that are also business owners too, that operate in this country. Those that are already taking on all of the risk and all of the burden from running a business in this country, which is supporting economic output, employment, and also they're contributing their fair share of tax revenues too. But instead of building a society where people are actively encouraged to create and grow businesses in order to promote investment and more job opportunities and all of that kind of good stuff that comes from people building and growing businesses here in this country. Instead, I guess some could argue that this policy does kind of the exact opposite. Is one, I'm sure, of many other reasons why UK millionaires are leaving in their numbers. The equivalent to 10,800 millionaires being reported to have left the UK last year. And The Independent have also reported that that's the equivalent to 530,000 average taxpayers. Now, in my mind, if we continue to lose that top 1%, I think, and it's probably a little bit more the monetary value that I'm thinking about here, but we'll end up losing more than the government will gain from those additional national insurance contributions. And with the effects of this coming into place in the next 4 weeks or so, we'll just have to wait and see how that affects things like jobs numbers, unemployment rates, business closures, prices, which go on to affect inflation, which could even affect interest rates later on down the line. I guess we'll all just have to sit back and watch as this all plays out. So look, we've certainly got our fair share of global economic uncertainty right now, which no doubt is having some kind of impact on global financial markets too. But be sure to let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. And whilst you're over here, guys, YouTube thinks that you should watch this video next. With that being said, I'll see you over in the next one.